Marcus Chen had spent 6 years working as a salvage engineer on the frontier station called Alias 7, and in all that time he had learned one very important rule about survival in deep space. When a Volante warship appeared on your sensors, you prayed it would keep moving. The Volante were not the kind of aliens you wanted to meet, and everyone in the galaxy knew their reputation well enough to feel fear at the mere mention of their name. They stood 8 feet tall with bodies covered in thick scales that shifted color depending on their mood, and their forearms could tear through metal plating like it was wet paper. Their empire stretched across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy, and they had been conquering worlds since before humanity had figured out how to make fire. Most species they encountered were given 2 choices, and neither of those choices was pleasant. So when the damaged Volante cruiser limped into the Helios 7 sensor range, Marcus felt his stomach drop, and he was not alone in that feeling. The entire station went quiet as the massive ship approached, and people started whispering about evacuation protocols and emergency shelters. But the ship did not attack, and it did not threaten. It requested permission to dock. Station Commander Reyes was a tough woman who had survived pirate raids and solar storms, and even a brief war with the Stentori Collective. But even she looked pale when she accepted the docking request. 2 hours later, she called Marcus to her office, and the look on her face told him that his day was about to get much worse. The Volante have a wounded warrior, Reyes said, and her voice was steady, but Marcus could see her hands shaking slightly. Her armor is damaged and they need someone to repair it. Marcus waited for the rest of the explanation, because surely there had to be more to this story. They asked for our best engineer. Reyes continued, and that means you. Commander, with respect, I work on human machines, Marcus said, and he tried to keep his voice calm. I have never even seen Volante technology up close, and I am pretty sure they execute people for touching their equipment. They made the request, Marcus, and when the Volante make a request, you do not say no. So this is a death sentence then? Reyes looked at him, and for a moment he saw something like sympathy in her eyes, but it disappeared quickly. Behind the mask of command, it might be, she admitted. But if you refuse, they might decide to take offense, and then everyone on this station dies instead of just you. Marcus understood the math, and he did not like it, but he understood it. 1 hour later, he stood outside the sealed repair bay with his toolkit in hand, and his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. The door opened, and he stepped inside. The Volante warrior sat on a cargo crate in the center of the room, and she was the most terrifying thing Marcus had ever seen. Her name was Kethra Voss, though he would not learn that until later, and she was everything the stories had warned about. 8 feet of scaled muscle, covered in bioluminescent markings that pulsed with a soft blue light beneath. Her skin and forearms that ended in claws, sharp enough to gut a man with a casual swipe. Her armor was a work of art, even in its damaged state, and Marcus found himself staring at it despite his fear. It was made of something that looked like crystal, fused with living metal, and it covered her body in overlapping plates that seemed to breathe with her movements. But the armor was cracked and broken in several places, and luminescent fluid leaked from the fractures in a steady drip that Marcus suspected was her blood. One of her arms hung limp at her side, and her breathing was shallow and labored. She watched him approach with slitted eyes that never blinked, and Marcus felt like a mouse walking toward a cat that had not yet decided if it was hungry. You are the smith, she said, and her voice was deep and rough like stones grinding together. I am an engineer, Marcus corrected, and he was surprised his voice did not shake. I fix machines. Then fix this. She gestured at her damaged armor with one of her working arms, and Marcus understood that this was not a request. He set down his toolkit and approached slowly and carefully, like a man walking through a minefield. Up close, the armor was even more impressive and more confusing than he had expected. Technology was completely alien to anything he had ever worked with, and there were no seams or bolts or connectors that he could recognize. The circuits did not look like circuits at all, but more like veins running through the crystalline surface. And they pulsed with a faint light that matched the warrior's own bioluminescent markings. Marcus had no schematics and no manuals and no idea what he was doing. But he had something else, and it was something he had possessed since childhood. He could listen to machines. It was not a supernatural power or anything mystical like that, but rather an intuition that let him understand how things worked just by touching them and paying attention. His grandmother had called it a gift, and his teachers had called it an unusual talent, and the other engineers on the station had called it creepy. Marcus just called it useful. He placed his hands on the damaged armor and closed his eyes and let his fingers trace the fracture lines. The metal was warm beneath his touch, almost alive, and he could feel vibrations running through it like a heartbeat. He listened to those vibrations, and slowly the damage began to make sense to him. Here was a power conduit that had been severed, and here was a resonance chamber that had cracked under stress, and here was a circuit that had burned out from overload. He could not read the technology, but he could feel what was wrong with it, and feeling was enough. Marcus opened his toolkit and got to work. He did not notice when Kethra Voss stopped breathing, and he did not see the way her war markings began to pulse brighter with every touch of his hands. He was too focused on the work, and the work was all that mattered. The machine was broken, and he was going to fix it. That was what Marcus Chen did, and he was very good at it. 3 hours into the repair, Marcus had lost all sense of time and place. The world had narrowed down to just his hands and the armor beneath them, and nothing else existed outside that small circle of focus. He worked with tools that were never designed for alien technology, and somehow they worked anyway. The micro-welder sealed fractures that should have been impossible to repair, and his diagnostic scanner picked up readings that made no sense, but also told him exactly what he needed. To know, his fingers moved with a confidence that surprised even him, as if they knew what to do before his brain had figured it out. The armor responded to his touch in ways he did not understand and could not explain when he pressed against a damaged section. The crystalline surface seemed to soften just enough to let him work, and when he needed access to deeper layers, the plates shifted aside like they were welcoming him. Marcus did not question any of this, because questioning would have broken his concentration, and concentration was the only thing keeping him alive right now. What he did not know and could not have guessed was that the Lanthi armor was not simply equipment. It was bonded to its wearer at a level that went beyond physical connection. The neural links between a warrior and their armor ran deep into the nervous system, and every sensation the armor felt was transmitted directly to the person wearing it. Every adjustment Marcus made, and every fracture he sealed, and every circuit he rerouted sent pulses of sensation through Kethra Voss like ripples spreading across still water. But these were not pulses of pain. Among the Volanthi, the act of armor repair was sacred, and the smiths who performed it were treated with a reverence usually reserved for religious figures. A warrior's armor was their second skin, and their protection and their identity all wrapped into one. Allowing someone to touch, it was an act of profound trust that most Volanthi only extended to their closest family members. The repair process itself was ritualistic and took years of training to perform correctly. Smiths used specialized tools that had been blessed by the high priests, and they worked in silence while speaking sacred words under their breath. The whole ceremony could take days, and it was considered one of the most intimate acts in Volanthi culture. And here was this small, soft human with his crude tools and his complete ignorance running his bare hands along her bond shell like it was just another machine to be fixed. Kethra should have been furious, and she should have killed him for this violation of everything her people held sacred. But she was not furious. She was confused and fascinated, and feeling things she had no words to describe. Every touch of his fingers sent warmth spreading through her body, and every adjustment He made felt like a gentle hand, smoothing away years of accumulated damage. Her war markings, which had been dormant since the battle that nearly killed her, began to pulse with new light. These markings were not decorative, but rather a biological response to strong emotions, and their activation now told a story that Kethra did not want to acknowledge. "Human," she said, and her voice came out rougher than she intended. "What are you doing?" Marcus did not look up from his work, and his hands never stopped moving. "Rerouting your secondary power distribution," he said in a tone that suggested this was the most obvious thing in the world. Whoever designed this system was brilliant, but they did not account for cascade failures in the tertiary network, so I am adding some redundancy. Kethra stared at him and tried to process what he had just said. "You should not be able to do this." "Probably not." Marcus agreed and reached for another tool. "But the damage is not going to fix itself, so someone has to try, and right now that someone is me. Do you know what you are touching? Your armor, which is broken and needs to be repaired. It is more than armor, human." Marcus finally looked up, and Kethra saw something in his eyes that she had not expected. There was no fear there and no arrogance, either just calm focus and genuine concern. "I know," he said quietly. "I can feel it, and the armor is alive somehow and connected to you. And I do not understand the technology, but I understand that much at least." He turned back to his work, and his voice became distant again as his concentration deepened. "Hold still, because this next part might feel strange." Kethra Voss had killed 17 enemy champions in single combat. She had walked through plasma fire on the burning decks of dreadnoughts, and she had faced death more times than she could count. But when this small human told her to hold still, she obeyed without hesitation. She did not understand what was happening to her, and she did not know why she felt so vulnerable and so safe at the same time. All she knew was that when Marcus Chen touched her armor, it felt like being truly seen for the first time in her very long life. The hours passed, and Marcus continued to work with that same focused intensity. He sealed fractures and rerouted power and repaired damage that Volanti Smiths would have declared beyond saving, and somewhere in the process, he found something else that caught his attention. There was a flaw in the armor that had nothing to do with the battle damage. It was a manufacturing defect hidden deep in the core matrix, and it had been causing Kethra minor discomfort for 30 years. No one had ever noticed it before, because no one had ever looked as closely as Diaz. Marcus was looking now. He fixed that too, because it was broken and broken. Things needed to be fixed. That was the simple truth at the heart of who Marcus Chen was. When Kethra felt that old familiar ache suddenly disappear, she made a sound that was half gasp and half something else entirely. Marcus did not notice because he was already moving on to the next problem. He had no idea what he had just done, and he had no idea that he had just changed his entire life forever. The repair took 11 hours, and when Marcus finally stepped back from his work, he could barely stand. His hands were trembling from exhaustion, and his eyes burned from staring at alien circuitry for so long. Luminescent fluid covered his arms up to the elbows, and strange residues stained his clothes in patterns that glowed faintly in the dim light of the repair bay. But the armor was fixed, more than fixed actually, because as Marcus looked at his work, he realized that the armor was in better condition now than it had been before the battle. The fractures were gone, and the power systems hummed with a steady rhythm. And even the color of the crystalline surface seemed brighter and more alive. He had no idea how he had done it, and honestly, he was too tired to care about the details right now. It should be stable, Marcus said, and his voice was hoarse from hours of silence. But you should probably have a Volanti Smith look it over when you get back to your people, because I might have made mistakes that I cannot even recognize. He reached for a rag and started wiping the luminescent fluid from his hands. "Thank you for being patient with me," he added. "I know this probably was not what you expected when you asked for a repair. Kethra Voss did not respond. She was too busy trying to understand what had just happened to her. Armor felt different now, and not just because the damage was repaired. It felt like it had been reborn and reconnected to her in ways that went deeper than before. She ran her clawed fingers along the surface and marveled at how smooth it felt. The old ache that had plagued her for 3 decades was gone, and she had not even realized how much pain she had been carrying until it disappeared. And there was something else too, something she could not name, but could definitely feel a warmth that had nothing to do with the armor and everything to do with the man who had repaired it. Kethra stood up suddenly, and Marcus flinched backward because 8 feet of Volante warrior moving at combat speed was terrifying, even when you were not the target. She crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and placed one massive hand on his shoulder. Marcus held very still and tried not to think about how easily those claws could remove his head from his body. "You have touched my bond shell," Kethra said, and her voice was low and intense. "You have mended what was broken." "Yes," Marcus said carefully. "That was the job. It was not a job human." She stared down at him, and her war markings pulsed in a pattern that Marcus did not recognize, but somehow understood meant something important. "Among my people, this creates an obligation," she continued, "a debt that must be acknowledged. I do not need payment." Marcus said quickly, "The station will send a bill to your ship for the repair costs, and that will cover everything." "Not payment." Kethra made a sound that might have been frustration or might have been something else entirely. "You do not understand because you cannot understand because no one outside the Empire has ever done what you just did. I just fixed him armor." "You did not just fix armor." She released his shoulder and stepped back, but her eyes never left his face. "Our smiths train for 50 years before they are allowed to touch a warrior's bond shell, and even then they use sacred tools and speak sacred words and follow rituals that have been unchanged for 10,000 years. Marcus said nothing because he had no idea what to say. "You walked in here with a box of crude instruments and no training and no understanding of what you were touching, and you repaired damage that our best smiths would have called impossible. I've always been good with machines." Marcus said weakly, "This is not just machines, human." Kethra's voice dropped to something almost like a whisper. "You touched my soul tonight, and you did not even know it, and that creates a bond that I do not have words to explain to you." Marcus felt like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. He had come into this room expecting to die, and instead he had apparently done something that changed everything. "What does that mean for me?" he asked. "It means I owe you a debt that cannot be repaid with credits or goods or services," Kethra said. "It means you have placed your hands on my very being and left your mark there." "I did not mean to." "I know," she interrupted. "That makes it worse and better at the same time." She turned toward the door, and Marcus noticed that she moved differently now. The injured arm that had hung limp before was working again, and her whole body seemed lighter somehow. "I must return to my ship and report what has happened here," Kethra said. "My people will need to know about you." "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" She paused at the door and looked back at him. "I do not know yet, but I will return to find out. When I understand what you are and what this means for both of us." Then she was gone, and the door sealed behind her, and Marcus was left alone in the empty repair bay. He stood there for a long time, trying to process everything that had just happened. He had expected to die tonight, and instead he had apparently formed some kind of mystical bond with one of the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy. Commander Reyes was going to have so many questions, and Marcus had no answers to give her. He looked down at his hands, still stained with luminescent residue, and wondered what he had gotten himself into. The truth was something he would not learn until much later. He had passed a test that he did not know he was taking, and the results of that test were going to change not just his life, but the future of his entire species. But that was a story for another time. Right now, Marcus just wanted to sleep. The Volanthi warship departed from Helios 7 the next morning, and life on the station slowly returned to something like normal. Marcus went back to his regular duties repairing human machinery and trying to forget about the strange night he had spent with an alien warrior commander. Reyes asked him questions that he could not answer, and eventually she stopped asking. 3 weeks passed, and Marcus began to think that maybe nothing would come of his encounter with Kethra Voss. He was wrong. The first attack came on a Tuesday, when a cargo convoy heading to the station was intercepted by raiders. This was not unusual because pirates operated all along the frontier and cargo. Ships were easy targets, but these were not ordinary pirates. They were organized and well-equipped, and they had very specific demands. They wanted the human Smith word had spread through the criminal underworld faster than Marcus could have imagined. Someone had talked, and someone had listened, and now dangerous. People knew that a human had touched Volanthi armor and lived more than that. They knew he had actually repaired it without any training or sacred rituals. This meant one of two things to the criminal minds of the galaxy. Either the human knew secrets about Volanthi technology that could be worth billions of credits, or the human had abilities that could be exploited for profit. Either way, Marcus Chen had become the most valuable commodity on the frontier, and people were willing to kill to get their hands on him. The second attack came a week later when a group of mercenaries tried to infiltrate the station through a maintenance airlock station. Security stopped them, but just barely, and 2 guards were injured in the fighting commander. Reyes moved Marcus to a secure section of the station and posted armed guards outside his quarters around the clock. She started talking about protective relocation to a core world where he would be safer. Marcus did not want to leave because Helios 7 was his home, and he had friends here and a life that he had built over 6 years. But he also did not want to get himself or anyone else killed. The third attack never made it to the station because something happened that no one had expected. Volanthi came back, not just a single warship this time, but an entire fleet. 12 massive cruisers dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation and took up positions around Helios 7 like a protective wall. Commander Reyes nearly had a heart attack when she saw the sensor readings. "They are hailing us," a communications officer reported with a voice that shook slightly. "Put them through." Reyes said. The main view screen flickered to life, and there was Kethra Voss looking very different from the wounded warrior who had limped into the station 3 weeks ago. She stood tall and proud on the bridge of her ship, and her armor gleamed with new markings that had not been there before. These markings indicated a rank that humans had no translation for, but the other Volanthi on screen treated her with obvious deference. "Station Commander," Kethra said. "I have returned as I promised. War Herald Voss." Reyes replied, and Marcus noticed the new title. "We are honored by your presence, but confused by your numbers. I bring a fleet because there are those who wish harm to the human. Smith and I will not allow that harm to occur." Marcus, who was watching the exchange on a monitor in his secure quarters, felt his jaw drop. "The human is under my protection now," Kethra continued, "and under the protection of the Volanthi High Council by extension. May I ask why?" Kethra's war markings pulsed in what Marcus had learned to recognize as amusement. "I petitioned the council and told them what the human did to my armor, and they did not believe me at first because what he accomplished should have been impossible. Then they reviewed my armor's diagnostic logs and saw the truth with their own eyes. The human did not merely repair the damage from battle, but he improved the core systems in ways that our own smiths had never considered, and he fixed a manufacturing defect that had gone unnoticed for 30 years. Commander Reyes glanced at the camera. She knew Marcus was watching through. He did all this by instinct, without training, and without understanding what he was working with. Kethra said, "My people have a name for this ability. We call it Calver, which translates roughly as ghost touch. It is the ability to understand machines at a level beyond analysis or study, and it is rare among my own species to find it. in a human is unprecedented. Marcus felt dizzy as he listened to this explanation of something he had always taken for granted. He had never thought of his talent as anything special, just a useful quirk that made his job easier. Now, apparently, it was some kind of rare gift that had caught the attention of one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. The Council's orders are clear. Kethra said, the human is to be protected from those who would exploit or harm him. He is also to be studied so that we can understand his gift better. And if he is willing, he is to be taught the sacred arts of armor smithing, Commander. Reyes took a moment to process all of this. What if he is not willing? Kethra's eyes seemed to find the camera directly, and Marcus felt like she was looking straight at him. Then he remains under our protection, regardless, and we leave him in peace. But I do not believe he will refuse because I have seen his heart, and I know what drives him. He fixes broken things because that is who he is, and we have many broken things that need fixing. The communication ended, and the fleet remained in position around the station like a wall of steel and fire. No more raiders came after that because attacking a Velanti fleet was suicide, and everyone knew it. A day later, Marcus received a formal invitation to visit the flagship and meet with Kethra Voss to discuss his future. He accepted because she was right about him. He had always been drawn to broken things, and the opportunity to learn how to fix technology beyond anything humanity had created was too tempting to resist. When he boarded the shuttle that would take him to the fleet, he was not afraid. He was excited. 6 months had passed since Marcus Chen left Helios 7, and in that time his entire understanding of the universe had been turned upside down. Stood now on the observation deck of the Velanti flagship, watching stars streak past as the fleet traveled deeper into Empire space than any human had ever gone before. The view was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache, and he never got tired of watching it. Behind him, he heard the familiar heavy footsteps of Kethra Voss approaching, and he smiled. Without turning around, "You are brooding again," she said, and her voice carried that tone of gentle mockery he had come to know well. "I am not brooding," Marcus replied. "I am contemplating. Among my people, those words mean the same thing." She came to stand beside him, and her massive frame blocked out a portion of the starfield, but Marcus did not mind her. Presence had become comfortable and familiar over the past months, like the weight of a favorite blanket. "What troubles you?" she asked. "I still do not understand why all of this happened," Marcus said. "I just fixed the armor, and now I'm living on an alien warship, learning sacred techniques from masters who have trained for centuries." "You did not just fix armor. You keep saying that, but I still do not really understand what you mean." Kethra was silent for a moment, and her warm markings pulsed thoughtfully. "Let me try to explain it differently," she said. "When our smiths work on armor, they follow precise procedures that have been refined over 10,000 years, and they use tools that have been blessed by priests, and they speak words that have been passed down through generations. All of this ritual exists because armorsmithing is not just mechanical repair, but spiritual communion with the bond shell. The smith must earn the armor's trust before it will allow itself to be healed." Marcus nodded slowly, because this much he had learned during his training. "When you touched my armor that first night, you had none of these advantages," Kethra continued. "You had no training and no blessed tools and no sacred words and no understanding of what you were doing. And yet the armor let you in anyway. More than that, it welcomed you like it had been waiting for your touch." She turned to look at him directly, and her slitted eyes were intense in the dim light. "Do you know how long our smiths train before they can achieve that kind of connection?" 50 years, you said. 50 years of study and ritual and practice just to reach the point where the armor will accept their presence. You did it in 5 minutes with your bare hands and a box of human tools. Marcus felt uncomfortable with this kind of praise because he had not done anything special in his own mind. He had just listened to the machine and done what needed to be done. That is Kelver. Kethra said, as if reading his thoughts. The ghost touch is not something that can be learned or trained, because it is an innate connection to the mechanical world that some beings are simply born with. Among my people, perhaps 1 in a million possesses this gift, and they become the greatest smiths in our history. But you humans, she made a sound that was almost like a laugh. You seem to produce them much more frequently. We do. Your species has an unusual relationship with machines, and I think it comes from your short lives and your desperate need to understand everything around you as quickly as possible. You do not have time for 10,000 years of ritual, so you find shortcuts, and those shortcuts require a kind of intuition that most species never develop. Marcus thought about this and realized it made it strange. Kind of sense humans had always been good at improvising and adapting and figuring things out on the fly. Maybe that necessity had bred something into them that other species lacked. The Council sees great potential in this. Kethra said, not just in you but in humanity as a whole. What do you mean? We have been watching your species for a long time, and we have always considered you too young and too primitive to be worth serious attention. But now we are reconsidering that assessment. She gestured at the stars beyond the viewport. The galaxy is vast and old and full of dangers that you cannot imagine, and the Velanti have spent millennia fighting to protect our territory from threats that would consume everything in their path. We are strong, but we are not infinite, and our numbers have been declining for centuries. We need allies, and we need new perspectives, and we need beings who can look at problems with fresh eyes and find solutions we would never consider. Marcus began to understand what she was suggesting, and it took his breath away. You want humanity to join you. I want humanity to grow into something worthy of joining us, and I believe that with guidance you can become that something faster than anyone expects, starting with you. She placed one of her hands on his shoulder, and the weight of it was familiar now. You are the first human smith in Velanti history, and you will not be the last, because there are others like you among your people, and we will find them. Together we will build something new, and the galaxy will never be the same. Marcus looked out at the stars and thought about everything that had led him to this. Momenta-damaged warship limping into port, and commander who needed someone to take a dangerous job, and a warrior who needed her armor repaired. Such small things to have such enormous consequences, but that was how history worked. He supposed great changes often began with simple acts performed by ordinary people who had no idea what they were starting, had just wanted to fix a broken machine, and instead he had opened a door between two civilizations. I am not special, he said quietly. I'm just an engineer who's good at listening to machines. You are exactly right, Kethra replied, and that is what makes you extraordinary. Most beings spend their lives trying to impose their will on the universe, but you learned to listen instead, and the universe rewarded you for it. She released his shoulder and turned to leave. Training resumes in 1 hour, and today we begin working on combat armor from the 3rd dynasty, which has not been touched by living hands in 2,000 years. Try not to break anything sacred. Marcus laughed because he knew she was joking and also knew she was completely serious. He took one last look at the stars and then followed her into the depths of the ship. Behind him, the galaxy continued to turn, and somewhere in the distant reaches of space, humanity was waking up to possibilities they had never imagined it. It started with one man and a toolkit, and a willingness to touch something unknown. It would end with an alliance that reshaped the balance of power across the stars. But that was a story still being written, and Marcus Chun was determined to see it through to whatever conclusion awaited. He was an engineer after all, and engineers finished what they started.